At present, we are seeing a different kind of political and economic development in the African continent. Within the last 2 years, coups have changed the landscape, and more African countries are achieving real autonomy and power. Despite being independent, they were heavily influenced by their former colonizers, such as Britain, Spain, France, and Belgium. However, out of all the colonizers, France was the worst. It's because, unlike other colonizers, it did not leave its former colonies throughout the world. It's a sick habit, but it is the one that allows France to prosper and exert influence throughout the world. Whatever you see in France, from the city of Paris to Nice and Lyon, all are built from the wealth plundered from Africa. This is the very reason why the latest developments in Africa are in response to what France did for centuries. But exploitation, plundering, and looting are not the only things France did during the colonial era. It used dirty tactics to abuse African countries even after their independence. Media always hides this, and you won't find any research done on this issue. That's when Professor Patrick Otieno Lumumba speaks, revealing how France is the worst of all colonizers and what it has been doing. What did he reveal, and how did he expose France? Let's know about that in this video. Patrick Otieno Lumumba, better known as PLO Lumumba, is a Kenyan lawyer, activist, professor, former director of the Kenya School of Law, and former director of the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission. He is the man who has studied and seen what France did in Africa as a colonizer. And recently, he went public and exposed France, leaving nothing untold. But to understand, we have to go to the very roots. Latin America, alongside the adjacent regions of Central America and the Caribbean, possesses a captivating history. That's when the term New World was coined, because the Spaniards explored this area. It's essential to recall that Christopher Columbus, often attributed to discovering the New World, was initially on a journey to India, but instead encountered indigenous Americans. In a case of historical misidentification, thinking he had reached India, he labeled the natives Red Indians. This mix-up contributes to the uniqueness of this region, marked by empires like the Arawakan, the Mayas, and the Aztecs, each boasting distinctive civilizations. For example, the Arawakan thrived in present-day Honduras, Colombia, Costa Rica, Panama, and Nicaragua. Unfortunately, many of these civilizations suffered decimation from the Spaniards, whose influence extended to Mexico, Nicaragua, Honduras, Colombia, and Brazil. The Portuguese left their imprint in Brazil, the British in modern-day Belize, the French in Suriname, and the Dutch in the Dutch Antilles. These once new lands evolved into hubs of slavery, as the local populations were intentionally and systematically reduced through military actions and the introduction of diseases previously unfamiliar in that part of the world. PLO Lumumba said that the profound impact of these actions is evident in the disappearance of languages and cultures. For instance, the Arawakan language vanished among those who later migrated to the island now recognized as Saint Vincent and the Grenadines. The majority of slaves brought to this region were transported after local populations had been destroyed. Professor Lumumba argues that understanding this historical context explains why the Portuguese turned to Brazil and other locations as sources for enslaved individuals. In Brazil, a substantial Yuba population coexists with a significant presence of Ambo and Vundu, both originating from present-day Angola. Additionally, there's a community from Mozambique. Once again, it's clear that colonizers from their African colonies or conquered territories facilitated the transportation of these individuals to Latin America. The Spaniards took people from their colonies and areas beyond their control, such as Equatorial Guinea. Numerous Equatorial Guineans were taken from there and from São Tomé and Príncipe, ultimately ending up in Spanish colonies. The British, renowned for enslaving individuals from Ghana, Nigeria, the Gambia, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, relocated them to Trinidad and Tobago, where a sizable population traces its origins to West Africa. Jamaica similarly accommodates individuals of West African descent, including a distinctive group known as the Maroons, who escaped slavery, settled in the mountains, and formed a free community. This migration pattern repeats in other Caribbean nations like Trinidad and Tobago, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as well as Suriname and the Dutch Antilles. All major European powers engaged in this practice, driven by the profitable sugar and banana industries. Honduras and Colombia, once prominent in banana cultivation, also became key destinations for enslaved individuals during the era of slavery. The process of decolonization commenced in September 1812, with Central American nations reclaiming their independence. Influential figures like Simon Bolivar played pivotal roles in this decolonization process, leaving a lasting impact on the names of states such as Venezuela and Bolivia. Cuba, under Spanish control, and the Bahamas also underwent classical slavery, followed by colonization by Western European powers. It should be noted that there was no standardized approach to handling slaves across colonized and enslaved societies. Each European power in the era of slavery implemented distinctive methods. In regions influenced by Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, or English dominance, individuals often discovered that even after reclaiming their freedom, their masters retained control over them. Laws were enacted to perpetuate slavery, as not everyone concurred with its abolition. Despite the illegitimacy of trading humans as commodities, the institution of slavery endured. In numerous parts of the world, enslavers had the authority to seize ostensibly free individuals, compelling them to work on farms. The Portuguese and Spaniards were infamous for such practices. Although the English asserted abandonment post-abolition, leftovers of exploitation persisted, particularly in the islands where control was less stringent than the mainland. Despite legal measures like the Dred Scott decision in the United States signaling the end of slavery and the slave trade, some persisted in these practices. Many emancipated individuals confronted an uncertain future, lacking homes, means, and even knowledge of where to turn. In certain instances, individuals, driven by the need for sustenance, opted to return to their former masters, finding at least some stability in their familiar but constrained conditions. Furthermore, slave hunters persisted, capturing those who had secured their freedom and returning them to slave camps. Haiti is a poignant illustration of a nation beset by challenges, with its tragic history rooted in its interactions with the French. As the inaugural Black African country to attain independence, Haiti witnessed the rise of the formidable Haitian independence fighter Toussaint Louverture, renowned for defeating Napoleon. However, this triumph sparked enduring animosity from the French. Haiti gained independence in the 1890s, evolving into a predominantly black nation, with a significant portion of its populace originating from Benin, formerly Dahomey. Despite retaining aspects of their cultural heritage, Haiti continued to grapple with relentless hostility from the French. That was when the world saw what lay in the building blocks of France. Unlike other colonizers, it never wanted its colonies to have independence. Rather, it wanted them to be under its rule forever. A closer look at Haiti's map unveils the adjacent Dominican Republic, where the white population was relocated. Port-au-Prince, the capital of Haiti, transformed into a focal point dominated by its black inhabitants. The French, unwavering in their resolve that Haiti should not know peace post-Napoleon's defeat, imposed a considerable burden. At the time of independence, a treaty mandated Haiti to pay reparations to the French, an absurd demand echoing colonial exploitation, further exacerbating Haiti's challenges. Yes, instead of paying reparation to Haiti, France was demanding reparation. The argument was that since France allowed Haiti to be independent, Haiti had to pay for it. This became the root of Haiti's misery. That's the worst colonial element that France preserves to this day. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. The distinct nature of the French people comes to light as they assert that France is the progenitor of modern-day revolution, citing the 18th century French Revolution as their hallmark. Ironically, France stands out as one of the most oppressive colonizers upon objective assessment. While Samora Moises Michel cautioned against categorizing slave makers, it's undeniable that, in this context, the French were notably severe. In contrast to the British, whose interest lay in resource exploitation through direct rule, the French pursued assimilation. Their policy aimed to convert colonized populations into French men and women. In places like Senegal, Mali, Burkina Faso, Togo, Benin, and Suriname, French-controlled morning parades saw black pupils reciting French slogans, showing the desired assimilation into French culture. The French approach to their colonies, labeled overseas territories, indicated a lack of intention to depart. Instead of calling them colonies, which meant the land of others forcefully ruled by an outside power, France called them overseas territories. This showed what France was planning to do. From Suriname to Vietnam, Senegal to Mali and Guinea, they persisted with harsh tactics, suppressing local languages and displaying reluctance to relinquish control. Professor Lumumba argues that this severity might find its roots in France's historical context, considering its past with monarchies. What's more, Professor Lumumba revealed what France does not want to know. He said that French history carries the scars of humiliation, shown by figures like King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. King Louis XIV's famous declaration, "I am the state," showed their response to inquiries about the state's condition. When confronted with the public's plea for bread during the era of King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, they callously suggested, "Why don't they eat cake?" This historical pain set the stage for the 1789 revolution, fueled by the humiliation endured in conflicts with Germany. Fast forward to 1958, amid decolonization, the French government summoned Charles de Gaulle, a military general, to employ force and retain control over their colonies. Although these colonies played a pivotal role in shaping modern France, their influence was marked by harshness. The French were determined to assert control, and their very survival seemed interwoven with these colonies. It's because resources coming from African colonies were being used to build and modernize France. Their severity is evident in their actions on the eve of independence for African countries, orchestrating a vote for French colonies to determine post-independence connections with Paris. While the French allowed a choice, they discouraged voting against continuity. When countries like Guinea voted no under Ahmed Sékou Touré, the French, upon departure, annihilated valuable assets. It was called Operation Persil, where they unscrewed light bulbs, dismantled plans for sewage pipelines in Conakry, the capital, and burned medicines instead of leaving them for the Guineans. Moreover, the French government ceased payments for the pensions of Guinean soldiers who had served in World War II for France. It showed how low France could stoop and what was its nature. To this day, former French colonies use the CFA franc, with currencies printed in France, a testament to enduring control. The French exhibited cruelty rooted in a deep psychological burden, a transfer of aggression from their painful history. This arrogance is evident in their dealings with African countries, displaying a refusal to recognize revolutions and insisting on the acceptance of their ambassadors. Once a bastion of revolution and ideals, France stands as one of the most arrogant colonial powers in history. But now, French arrogance is in decline, much like that of a school bully who, accustomed to taking lunch from every little boy and girl, suddenly encounters resistance. Caught off guard, the bully is hit and finds themselves on the ground, becoming the subject of laughter. Similarly, France failed to foresee the transformations in West Africa, experiencing economic weakening and grappling with a growing immigrant population at home, including Algerians, Moroccans, Senegalese, Guineans, and more in cities like Marseille. In the former colonies, a new generation is emerging. In places such as Guinea, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, young men and women are proclaiming the abolition of agreements with France. In Niger, a key uranium supplier, the sentiment is clear. They won't allow France to take it anymore. The tide is turning, and the former French president once said, "Without Africa, there is no France." Projections indicate that in 20 years, France may become one of the poorest nations in Europe without Africa. The resistance is intense because for France, this shift is a matter of life and death. But now, France's continuous exploitation of Africa is encountering a shift in momentum, evident in recent events in West Africa that portray a growing resistance to French neocolonialism among Francophone nations. The diminishing fear factor symbolizes Africa's genuine pursuit of independence, a process unfolding gradually. The coup in Niger on July 26, which poses a threat to French and U.S. military presence in the region, brings attention to the historical exploitation and ongoing practices of Françafrique. You should know that France heavily relies on nuclear energy, obtaining 68% of its power from nuclear plants, with 19% of the required uranium sourced from Niger. Despite this significant contribution, only 14.3% of Nigerians have access to a reliable power grid, underscoring the stark disparities and ongoing exploitation by foreign powers across the African continent. Afrique, known for its exploitative systems, has sought to profit from African resources using pressure, capital, and at times force to maintain control. Consequently, many African states, including Niger, grapple with persistent poverty and underdevelopment. Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso's youthful and charismatic leader, expressed his concerns at the Russia-Africa summit, criticizing the paradox of Africa being rich in resources while its people face impoverishment. He condemned African leaders seeking handouts from the West, characterizing it as perpetuating dependency and poverty. Traoré labeled Africa's predicament as a form of slavery, emphasizing the necessity for self-reliance and resistance. France's inability to justify its presence in Africa with a coherent narrative complicates the situation. The lack of a justifiable mission weakens French influence, contributing to violence and poverty. West Africa's pursuit of greater independence has sparked concerns among Atlanticists, who fear heightened influence from Eurasian powers like Russia and China in Africa. The West's response reveals a disregard for African sovereignty, viewing the continent primarily as a stage for maintaining global dominance. A February Munich Security Conference report highlighted a clear rift with the West. It stated that many countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America have steadily lost faith in the legitimacy and fairness of an international system. This system has neither granted them an appropriate voice in global affairs, nor adequately addressed their core concerns. To many states, these failures are deeply tied to the West. They perceive that post-colonial domination, double standards, and neglect of the concerns of developing countries have characterized the Western-led order. The aftermath of the Second World War marked a significant shift in global power dynamics, and the victorious powers sought to establish a new world order that would maintain peace and promote economic balance. In the context of African colonies, where colonial troops played a major role in the Allied victory, the victorious powers, including France, aimed to retain economic control and benefit from their former colonies, even as the world moved towards decolonization. This included establishing new currency systems, with French leader Charles de Gaulle creating two currencies collectively known as the CFA franc in 1945 for former colonies in the Western and Central zones. During the Cold War, communist states exploited such actions by presenting themselves as liberators and allies of African countries seeking independence from European influence. This stance has led to some Africans viewing countries like Russia as more equitable partners than France. Professor Lumumba argues that no matter with which country the African continent allies itself, it should be wary of France. Over the years, France has demonstrated a pattern of military intervention, over 50 times since 1960, in African countries to secure governments compliant with French economic interests, particularly related to the continued use of the CFA franc. The CFA franc operating system has historically been one of a fixed exchange rate, where the currency has unlimited convertibility but is permanently pegged to the French currency, previously the franc and then the euro. This means that African countries cannot influence the value of their currency, and the difference in value allows France to buy African products artificially cheaply. In contrast, Africans can buy fewer goods with the money they exchange. Worse yet, France had requirements to store, and thus profit from, the foreign reserves owned by its former colonies, though the requirement of holding 50% of their foreign exchange reserves in a French-run bank was dropped for the Western zone in 2019. Under this scheme, African states received a nominal amount of interest. Still, the bank benefited from lending that capital at higher rates and attaining massive profits from African resources and labor. This is even though many countries in Francophone Africa are major gold exporters and thus have various options for storing wealth to back a currency in alternative central banks. Northern African states such as Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco chose to leave the CFA franc upon gaining independence and have experienced relatively higher prosperity. Similarly, Botswana's success with its national currency demonstrates that proper management can lead to stable democracy and economic growth, even for less developed nations. The CFA franc system has been the geopolitical equivalent of a parent insisting on managing their child's savings while excluding them from their will. That's the literal reflection of how France paralyzed its former colonies even after their independence. This means France has depended on Africa for its status as a world power for over a century. Among other privileges carved out in post-colonial treaties, France has had the exclusive right to sell military equipment to former colonies. It enjoys the first right to any natural resources discovered. Paris greatly uses these privileges. For example, 36.4% of France's gas is sourced from Africa. Moreover, a vast network of French business interests, including major multinational companies, dominates industries such as energy, communications, and transportation in many African countries. This economic dependence has perpetuated a system where African states remain weak, compliant, and reliant on resource exports, primarily benefiting French companies and interests. Do you think there is a former colonizer besides France who continued exploiting its earlier colonies? Isn't it true that whatever Professor Lumumba said has created awareness, and people today know how evil France is? Let us know your thoughts on the future of Africa, as it is getting itself free from France in a real sense. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.